Stonehenge took approximately 20 million man-hours to build. For comparison, an average human doesn't live much over 700,000 hours. This is Jack, one of the first builders of Stonehenge. Let's say Jack lived to be 80 years old, which is extremely improbable, but it makes it easier for me to crunch the numbers, thanks. If Jack had spent his entire life, from age 0 to age 80, working on the Stonehenge project, it would have required approximately 28.5 generations of people doing the same thing to complete it. That's next to impossible. To make it more plausible, let's multiply that by 2. After all, Jack wouldn't want to dedicate his entire life to moving stones, and he didn't live to be that old. Thus, we arrive at around 57 generations needed to build Stonehenge. That's not enough room on the screen for me to introduce John, Jack's great-great-great-great, you get the drift, grandson. So it all began around 5,000 years ago with just a simple circular earthen bank and ditch. Fast forward to around 26,000 BCE, and the builders replaced that initial structure with a complex arrangement of wooden posts and brought in around 80 dolerite bloom stones from Wales, which were rearranged at least 3 times. Then, a few hundred years later, they added those massive sarsen stones, each weighing around 25 tons. These enormous sandstone blocks were transported about 19 miles to create a continuous outer circle, with 5 trilithons, 2 upright stones topped with a lintel, forming a horseshoe shape inside. It was a millennium-long building process that demanded years of hard work. So, people must have lived nearby, right? But how would they have found shelter back then? Today, we have houses for builders on site, small accommodations that serve as temporary housing. But structures like this definitely didn't exist when Stonehenge was constructed, did they? Well, actually, they existed, and some recent archaeological digs near Stonehenge prove it. Archaeologists found this Stone Age eco-home, which is a huge deal since it's one of the earliest settlements in the area. This newly uncovered Mesolithic home dates back to around the year 4300 BCE. Let's take a closer look at this house, shall we? Now, for the walls, people back then used a large fallen tree, its trunk to be more precise. These wooden walls were reinforced with flint, and they even lined the pit left by the uprooted tree with cobblestones. To create the roof, they opted for animal hides, which sounds like a wise choice. They must have provided protection against the unpredictable weather of the British Isles. Now, you might be wondering, the weather in Britain is indeed unpredictable, and it has been that way since time immemorial. So, how did the builders manage throughout most of the year, particularly during the winter months? Well, the answer is simple. There was a hearth on site, which isn't surprising, but the system they employed was quite ingenious. A hearth inside the house would have posed too great a risk, yet bringing hot stones into the dwelling was perfectly safe. While they were hot, they couldn't ignite the building. So they used these stones from the hearth as a heat storage system to keep warm at night. And as a final touch, they even incorporated various stones for decoration. They didn't exactly get a Pinterest house, but it added a touch of elegance for sure. And if you think this discovery is merely about the houses, think again. It significantly changes our understanding of how people lived during that time. This discovery places them in an important prehistoric setting right at the start of the Neolithic area, sparking some interesting questions about whether these early folks could be related to the people who built Stonehenge. But there's a big worry. Experts are concerned that this significant find, along with other buried archaeological sites, could be at risk if the authorities go ahead with plans to build a tunnel to reroute the A303 away from the World Heritage Site. Sure thing the house the scientists found wasn't in perfect shape, and it lacked some crucial elements people use for living. Some of them decayed over time, while others were simply absent. So the scientists took 20 tons of chalk, 5,000 hazel rods, and 3 tons of straw, and used all this to recreate the 4,500-year-old design houses. These new buildings are located close to Stonehenge, which is incredible since in this area, planning permission for even a new cowshed is problematic. So, what are these houses like? Well, first off, there are 4 of them, and they're oval-shaped. They're built on the foundation of real houses that stood there about 4,500 years ago. just around the time the Stonehenge Eco House was going up. The houses aren't very big, they're single-room structures. When it comes to dimensions, it was straightforward to estimate since we could gauge the size of the roof and the height of the walls based on the foundations. Each side measures about 16 feet. However, the roof structure remains a bit of a mystery. There were a few differing thatching techniques back then, so pinpointing the exact method used for these dwellings is kind of a guessing game. For now, we think it involves knotted or tied straw carefully secured onto a hazel-woven frame. When fires are lit, the smoke from the hearth wafts up through the thatched roof. Now, remember those 20 tons of chalk? That was needed for the floors and walls. The white chalk walls and floors reflect sunlight and capture heat from the fire. But here's the kicker. The builders encountered a challenge because the ground was so waterlogged that some of the chalk floors took weeks to dry out. By the time they should have been bone dry, they were still as sticky as chewing gum. Now, it's safe to say people 4,500 years ago faced similar struggles, and we can really appreciate what they went through while building their homes. The final layer of daub was applied using rags, giving a smooth, almost shiny finish that looks surprisingly classy. The interiors are furnished with wooden and wicker beds and shelves, along with clay pots and jars, all centered around a cozy hearth. The spaces feel surprisingly roomy and are filled with light that streams in through the thatched roof, bouncing off those white walls. Plus, the woven furniture adds a nice touch of authenticity to the vibe. The fires have been lit, and the first meal, bread crafted from flour ground on a stone mill next to the hearth, has been prepared. Those who tried the bread were pleasantly surprised by its flavor, finding it quite tasty. Now, here comes the bummer. Those who recreated the houses did cheat a little. While the materials used were authentic, the tools weren't. They used cement mixers to mix the daub, wheelbarrows to transport the timber, and logs by the hearth were split with steel axes instead of stone ones. Still, the builders aren't professionals, they're volunteers. So I think a bit of cheating is totally cool in this case. There are other volunteers on site who are more than happy to chat about the daily activities of the Stonehenge builders, from grinding grain with a quern to making rope from rushes. But these houses and the Eco House aren't the only remarkable things in the Stonehenge area. Some years ago, archaeologists uncovered a burial site close to Stonehenge that predates the monument itself. This Neolithic long barrow, dating back approximately 56 to 5,700 years, likely contains the remains of some of Britain's earliest inhabitants. The burial site was identified through aerial images that revealed its distinct shape beneath the crops. Salisbury Plain is rich with ancient sites, including Stonehenge, various mounds, and monuments. The area has remained undisturbed over the centuries, which is likely why so many ancient structures are still intact. This discovery also shows a significant shift in human lifestyle during that era, marking a transition from a nomadic existence to settled farming and animal husbandry, much like the Eco House itself. The long barrow in question measures about 85 feet long and 65 feet wide, though much of its above-ground structure has been lost to farming over the years. If this site is like others in the vicinity, it contains the remains of 30 to 50 individuals, along with cow skulls, which were significant to those early communities. The Moai statues have been standing tall and proud for hundreds of years. Once people put an enormous effort into carving these grand sculptures, and then they just suddenly stopped making them. But why? Let's figure out this mystery. Easter Island, located 2,500 miles east of Tahiti, has an area of 63 square miles. To this day, it's one of the most isolated islands in the world. Once it was covered with forests, filled with different trees and ferns. But when the first humans came to the island around 400 CE, the forest slowly began to disappear. And starting from 1250 CE, Moai statues began appearing all over the place. People made them from different types of rock: compressed volcanic ash, basalt, trachyte, and red scoria. As it's a volcanic island, these were all the ingredients the creators of the statues had to use. And once the builders completed their work, they covered the statues with pumice. The faces of the statues are different, but they all have distinct expressions with heavy brows and large noses. Their arms are carved into the body. Some have hats on top of their heads. There are nearly 900 statues all over the island. They differ in size. The average height is 13 feet tall, and the largest ones reach 33 feet in height and weigh up to 82 tons. Because the statues have so many different faces, there are theories that they represent and honor ancestors, chiefs, and other important people who lived on the island. But without any clear evidence, it's almost impossible to figure out the true purpose of the moai. Once they stood beautifully along the coast, watching over people in settlements, and their backs faced toward the spirit world of the sea. When Europeans first discovered the moai statues in the 1700s, many of them had already toppled over, and the construction of statues had stopped way earlier than that. Huge amounts of effort were put into making these things. Expert craftspeople spent a great deal of time slowly carving the statues with basic picks. A team of up to 6 people would work hard for an entire year to make just one statue. Then they often had to transport it to its special place on the island, as far as 11 miles. With the help of carbon dating, experts have managed to figure out that the statues started to appear in 1250 CE. And then, suddenly, in 1500 CE or so, the process just stopped. The creators of the statue just left their stone chisels where they were last used, and only a quarter of all the statues were actually placed where they were supposed to be. Half of them still remained in the quarry, while others were left on the ground mid-transit. Something happened on the island, and it caused everyone to just lose interest in the statues. There are many theories around why it could happen, and they mostly relate to deforestation. Islanders may have used wood to move the statues across the island. They possibly did this with the help of sleds and ropes, or even used logs to roll the statues or canoes to float them. The wood started to deplete eventually. Trees on the island took very long to grow, and rats ate most seeds. People had many uses for wood, and they needed it not only for practical things, but also to create other statues. Another reason why the inhabitants of the island could have stopped building the statues might be that they were busy with other projects. Specialized rock gardens were becoming more common with a growing population. They were great for the soil, keeping it warm and fertilizing it at the same time. Islanders spent much time and effort making these rock gardens, and there simply wasn't enough time to focus on building and moving the statues. Another theory suggests that what people believed in changed over time. Supposedly, the islands once saw the statues as a connection to their ancestors. After some time, though, rituals depicting a show of strength and endurance became more widespread. And with these rituals, islanders started to carve images related to seabirds. Seabirds became the main animal on the island. People started to believe that their ancestors looked over them through birds instead of the statues, so there was no longer a reason to build the moai. Anyway, these theories might be true, but the main problem was that the small island couldn't support a growing population. What was once a lush land covered in forests quickly became a barren landscape. For the first few centuries, people relied on forest resources, but agriculture became more important sometime after 1550, when forests disappeared. Tribes that once worked together to build the fantastic monoliths focused on competing against one another instead. During this struggle for land and resources, the moai statues were toppled over because people wanted to reduce their significance. Over the following centuries, all the statues were pushed over, but not all of them deliberately. Many fell naturally after being neglected for so long. Some even ended up in the ocean water surrounding the island, and there they sat for a while. But there was some good news for these statues. They were re-erected, providing a great experience for visitors from all over the world. If you make a journey all the way to this isolated island, the first question you'll probably ask will not be how the statues were made or how they were moved. It will be, how on earth did anyone even make it here in the first place? It was one of the most amazing feats ever. The Polynesians sure did some pretty extraordinary things. From as early as 1500 BCE, these boat-faring people began to explore their world. They used the most advanced marine inventions of their time. They sailed across the ocean in catamarans and outrigger boats, starting in Southeast Asia and inhabiting many more places throughout the Pacific. They lived as far north as Hawaii in 900 BCE, and all the way to the south in New Zealand by 1200 BCE. And the farthest journey to the east was, of course, Easter Island. In only a few hundred years, these early sailors inhabited an area of thousands of square miles. They simply memorized where they had already been, and this way managed to navigate the ocean. They used a wide range of techniques. They watched the sun as it rose and set during the day. Stars helped them at night. If it was overcast and sailors couldn't figure out direction visually, they used other brilliant methods. They watched the movements of ocean currents and wave patterns and paid attention to bioluminescence in the water. These patterns helped them find where specific islands were located. These seafarers even understood how islands and atolls in the distance caused air and sea interference patterns. Birds provided them with certain signs too. Some of them migrated long distances from one island to another, which gave travelers some kind of a visual connection for their route. Other types of birds had specific feeding times. Sailors knew when and where they hunted and directed their boats depending on where these birds fed. Vikings certainly get way too much credit for their seafaring abilities. Where they used a sun compass, the early Polynesians relied purely on the knowledge of how nature itself could guide them. Their skills were so advanced that in 1769, Captain James Cook, an English explorer, even hired a Polynesian navigator because of his extensive knowledge of the seas. But even more surprising was the fact that he drew a map from memory. It covered an area that was 2,000 miles wide. In this region, there were 130 islands, and the navigator knew 74 of those islands by name. At the beginning of their voyage, Captain Cook often disregarded the navigator's advice. But toward the end of their journey, he was very impressed. He also recognized the Polynesians as possibly the most widespread nation on Earth.
There are countless doors all over the world that haven't been opened for decades, and even centuries. The question is why? It seems that nowadays you can open any door you want. The truth is that some doors were sealed for a grave reason. And so far, nobody has found out what treasures and mysteries they hide. Here are 4 doors that keep their secrets all too well. The Taj Mahal. First up, we've got the Taj Mahal in India, one of the most romantic places in the world. Shah Jahan commissioned it in 1631 and dedicated it to his 3rd wife, who he loved like crazy. They were married for 19 years and had a whopping 14 kids together. But unfortunately, she passed away while giving birth to their last baby. Shah Jahan was heartbroken and decided to build an epic tomb to remember her by. The construction took a whopping 20 years to finish. The building has quite an interesting layout. The design is super unusual with these 4 massive 130-foot tall minarets that stand on the corners of a huge platform. They're not just there for looks. Back in the 17th century, architects were having some serious issues with buildings collapsing under their own weight. So, the chief architect of the Taj Mahal made sure to place those minarets as far away from the tomb as possible. And he even tilted them in a way so that if they did fall, they wouldn't wreck the rest of the Taj Mahal. Talk about planning ahead. The Taj Mahal is hiding some crazy secrets. There are sealed rooms all over the place that nobody is allowed to enter. And if you check out photos of the building from the riverside, you can spot 2 basements. But guess what? They're sealed up too. Nobody knows what's inside or why they've been locked up since the time of Shah Jahan. Apparently, there's a good reason why those rooms are off limits. Some researchers think that they were built using marble, which turns into a different substance called calcium carbonate if it's exposed to carbon dioxide. And when that happens, little bits of marble start chipping off like crazy. To make matters worse, there's no air flowing into these rooms. That means that if too much CO2 builds up in the basement, the 4 minarets could collapse. But wait, there's more. Some people think that the body of Shah Jahan's wife can be found in one of these sealed-up rooms in pristine condition. Why not? Who knows what the mysterious rooms might keep? The Great Sphinx of Giza. The Great Sphinx of Giza is shrouded in mystery. It's not just the largest monolith statue in the world, but it's also a hybrid creature with a woman's head and a lion's body that originates from Egyptian and Greek mythology. It's also very ancient. It's estimated to be around 4,500 years old. The construction of this marvel took about 3 years and required 100 workers who were not slaves and were treated with delicacies like sheep and goat meat. It is also thought that it used to be much more massive than it is now. Archaeologists found huge stone blocks and abandoned toolkits near the site. However, the real secrets of the Sphinx lie underground, near its paws. A group of scientists used a seismograph to detect 2 hidden chambers beneath the Sphinx's paws. Some people think that these rooms might be the legendary Hall of Records, which holds ancient scrolls revealing the secrets of the universe. I mean, that's way cooler than any library I've ever been to. Rumor has it that the Egyptians even had info on Atlantis stashed down there, which is like a super old version of a conspiracy theory. Unfortunately, we can't go on an adventure to check it out just yet. The chambers presumably have 2 entrances, but both remain sealed. The researchers haven't yet received the green light to check out their theory. Let's hope they won't keep us in suspense forever. Sri Padmanabhaswamy Temple. This temple is located in the beautiful state of Kerala in India. This temple is famous for more than just its breathtaking beauty. Underneath the temple there are 6 vaults, creatively named A, B, C, D, E, and F. The enormous iron doors to these chambers add to the mystery of what's behind them. A few years back, the authorities decided to open these vaults to the world, but it wasn't an easy task. You can't just open the doors and enter the vaults. It required a lot of work. It took them a while, but finally, in 2011, they opened 5 of the 6 chambers. And guess what they found? Tons of treasure. Bags of gold, precious gemstones, and priceless diamond jewelry. The estimated worth of everything found in the vaults is a whopping $1 trillion. It's like the temple was the real-life inspiration for Aladdin's Cave of Wonders. But wait, I said 5 of the 6. What happened to the last one? Vault B has remained closed, but not for lack of trying. They simply didn't manage to open it. There is even a belief that it's fatally cursed. Legend says that only a saint or sage can break the curse by chanting a specific mantra. But no one has been able to do this yet, presumably because we don't have saints or sages at our disposal. There is also rumor that in the 30s some temple invaders tried to enter Vault B to do some good old looting. But they never reached their target. Apparently terrible snakes materialized out of nowhere and chased the gang away. But of course, this is just an urban legend, and there is not proof of that. However, it is said that the Auditor General dealing with the temple claimed that Vault B had been opened at least 7 times since 1990, and nothing bad happened to anyone who entered. Who knows? Maybe we should send Indiana Jones to check it out. The First Emperor's Tomb. Deep under a hill, completely undisturbed and surrounded by dangerous traps, lies an ancient 2,000-year-old tomb. It belongs to Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. He was born in the Qin state and became king when he was just a boy. But when he grew up and gained full power, he united the warring states ancient China was divided into by conquering them. After that, he created the Qin dynasty. When he died in 210 BCE, they buried him deep underground in a massive tomb. And when I say massive, I mean massive! Back in 1974, some farmers in Xi'an, China, stumbled upon something strange while digging a well, a huge terracotta soldier. This discovery led to an extensive archaeological dig that has continued for over 40 years, revealing a collection of thousands of clay soldiers. The unique thing about these soldiers is that each one has its own unique features, from hairstyles to facial expressions. It's believed that there could be up to 8,000 of these soldiers, but only 2,000 have been found so far. Interestingly, the central tomb, which is believed to be the resting place of the emperor, is still untouched. In ancient records, there are references to a vast underground city that the emperor built, complete with scenic towers, palaces, and whatnot. Sima Qian, a Han Dynasty historian, wrote that the tomb was adorned with treasures and had space for hundreds of officials, but the lack of technology to properly examine the site is what's holding things up. Qin Shi Huang was surrounded by liquid mercury in his tomb, with 2 of the streams representing the major rivers of China. Yellow River, and Yangtze. The ancient Chinese believed that mercury could provide immortality, but it could have also caused the emperor's death since he regularly took mercury pills to prolong his life. The dangerous levels of mercury contamination in the soil near the tomb are the main reason why scientists are reluctant to explore it. It could be very dangerous both for people and for the environment. Now, if I had to choose which door to open, I'd probably go for the one that doesn't lead to a tomb surrounded by poisonous mercury. Call me crazy, but I'd like to avoid any potential health hazards. Let's dive into the fascinating world of Tamil, a language that's truly one of a kind. From its vibrant history to its user-friendly nature and its wide coverage, Tamil is a linguistic gem that'll leave you in awe. For starters, Tamil holds the title of being the oldest living language on the planet. I mean, it's been around for more than 5,000 years. It's hard to know if it's truly the oldest language ever, but it sure takes the cake for being the oldest living language still in use today. The word Tamil itself isn't just a one-trick pony. It has multiple meanings up its sleeve. Of course, it refers to the language itself, but it also signifies beauty, sweetness, and even the concept of being natural. Talk about a versatile word. How many people still speak this language today, you might wonder? Tamil is like the rock star of languages in India, with over 84 million native speakers. Globally, almost 90 million people proudly call Tamil their mother tongue. Hold on to your hats, because things are about to get divine. In India, you'll find a temple dedicated to none other than Tamul Tai. Now, Tai means mother, and this deity is considered the personification of the Tamil language as a loving and nurturing parent. This language is also not just limited to its homeland. It's a language that has spread its wings across its neighboring areas. For instance, it's also an official language in Singapore and Sri Lanka. Not to mention, it's also recognized as a minority language in South Africa, Malaysia, and Mauritius. Have you ever wondered how it all started? You know, the whole spoken word shenanigan? And where? It's not like words magically popped out of thin air, right? It must have taken quite some time to develop. Linguists don't have an exact date or any clue about what those ancient languages sounded like, but they believe the first spoken language sprouted up around 100,000 years ago. Unfortunately, since a written language only came about 5,000 years ago, we don't have much info on what those early languages sounded like. All we know is that they're somehow related to the languages we speak today. Earth is one massive place. We're talking over 7,000 spoken languages among a population of over 7 billion. Sounds like a lot, right? Well, historically speaking, that's not too many. In fact, many languages are gradually fading away, being replaced by their respective countries' official languages. People are hopping on the bandwagon of learning the dominant language for better educational and economic opportunities. Eventually, we might end up with a global language to rule them all. At the moment, the most used language in the world is English. But hey, it wasn't always like this. Back in the day, before the world became one huge linked web, there were oodles of small nations and communities scattered all over the globe. That means there were probably hundreds of thousands of languages evolving just like living organisms. But let's travel back in time for a bit, shall we? Picture a bunch of early humans roaming the land in their little tribes and communities. Within these groups, language became the bee's knees, the go-to for communication. It was crucial for their hunter-gatherer lifestyle. This language thingamajig allowed them to hunt like pros, multiply their numbers, build cool stuff, and survive in all sorts of gnarly conditions, even at high altitudes. Plus, it gave them a leg up on their rivals, like the Neanderthals. Sure, those folks may have been smarter and stronger, but it's widely believed they didn't gather together as Homo sapiens did. And so, about 40,000 years ago, poof, bye-bye Neanderthals. It just goes to show that language is quite a handy-dandy tool. Or at least that's one of the theories. Fast forward a bit, and humans had conquered all the major land masses. Mesopotamia, for instance, was the hotspot for this linguistic revolution, and by around 3,200 BCE, Sumerian, a totally groovy language, stole the show. To this day, it's one of the oldest ones we know of, if not the oldest. What's interesting is that Sumerian had no linguistic siblings. It was like the loner kid on the linguistic playground. Let's look into the Sumerians' writing skills for a bit too. It's nothing like what we're used to today. Scientists have named it cuneiform writing, and it emerged as a means to record trade and political information. As a matter of fact, the first recorded name in history wasn't of a king or some powerful figure. It was most likely the name of an accountant. But it's difficult to know for sure. Cuneiform consisted of a collection of pictograms that represented objects or people, much like the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. Sumerian culture thrived in several city-states located in the southern region of Mesopotamia. Uruk, known as the first true city, was among the stars of the show. However, these cities eventually faced some unwelcome visitors. As a result, by 2000 BCE, Sumerian had taken a back seat, becoming a classical language just like Latin. Now here's a little twist in the tale. Sumerian might not actually hold the title of the oldest known language. Egyptian, for instance, emerged around the same time as the Sumerian civilization, but along the banks of the Nile. This ancient language also made use of pictograms in its writing system, but it did undergo some serious transformations due to its interactions with neighboring languages like ancient Greek, Persian, and Latin. By the time of Roman occupation, Egyptian had become a dead language, gradually replaced by Greek. Now let's give a special shout out to another one of those old languages that are still spoken today, Hebrew. This remarkable language has been around for over 3,000 years and has managed to remain relatively unchanged throughout its long history. Hebrew is one of the official languages in Israel, and around 63% of the population in this country speaks it. Also, there are approximately 6.1 million people all over the world who can proudly say that Hebrew is their first language. We can't finish up this list without mentioning the amazing Latin language. It all started in this place called Latium in the old Roman Empire, and that's how it got its name. Back in the day, Latin was the fancy language for all well-educated folks. But here's a fun twist. The Latin of yesteryear was a bit different from what we can check out in ancient books today. The alphabet they used was a total rebel, and they even wrote from right to left. Talk about turning the writing world upside down. But over time they realized it was more fun to go from left to right. Latin literature? Oh boy, it's considered the creme de la creme of ancient writing. You know, the kind that scholars and bookworms go crazy for. If there were an Oscar for ancient literature, Latin would be cleaning up all the awards. Latin was also like this ancient influencer. It's been around for so long that it has influenced a bunch of modern languages. Many English words are either straight up taken from Latin or have been heavily influenced by it. More so, Latin has even spawned a family of languages called Romance languages. No, not about love stories, chocolates, and flowers. Romance languages are the offspring of Latin, thanks to the not-so-gentle nudge of the Roman Empire. We're talking about languages like French, Spanish, Romanian, Portuguese, and Italian. But here's a bummer. Latin is considered a long-gone language. It's frozen in time, like a linguistic time capsule. While living languages like English keep changing and growing, Latin is stuck in the past. It had its transformation and alteration phase when it was still spoken, but now it's just enjoying retirement in the linguistic retirement home. Regardless, Latin still sneaks into our daily lives without us even realizing it. You know when someone asks you the time and you say it's 4 p.m., well, guess what? You're speaking Latin. PM stands for post-meridiem, which basically means after midday. And AM? That's ante-meridiem, meaning before midday.
Canada is known for its snowy mountains, untouched forests, pristine lakes, friendly, helpful people, eh? And that delicious maple syrup. Now they get to add something else to the list: the world's oldest water. Back in 2016, researchers drilled down 1.9 miles and found an ancient pool of water at Kidmine, Ontario. The water was believed to be at least 2 billion years old. Not fresh water. The water was found bubbling up in caverns deep underground, inside the 3 million square miles of the Canadian Shield, one of the world's largest geological continental shields. The area endures very little plate tectonic activity, possibly explaining how the water remained untouched for so long. Scientists and researchers analyzed the water and found dissolved gases of helium, argon, xenon, and neon, untouched by any outside source. There were even traces of microbes dating back billions of years. This was a stunning find for science that allowed us to gaze back in time at a lost world. If life-supporting water can be found miles below the Earth, it could be possible to find the same thing on other planets like Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter's moons as well. Point Nemo is the furthest point from land on Earth, officially called the Oceanic Point of Inaccessibility, kind of like my parking space. It's so far from land that the closest humans to it are usually astronauts. The International Space Station orbits the Earth from around 250 miles away, while the closest populated spot to Point Nemo on Earth is more than 1,670 miles in all directions. Since its real title is a bit long, it was nicknamed Point Nemo after Captain Nemo from Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Nemo means no one in Latin, which suits this area perfectly because there's no people around. The Crooked Forest is found in Gryfino, Poland. It's a grove of 400 unusually curved pine trees that were planted around the 1930s. They bend northwards at a sharp 90-degree angle from the tree's base, but then remarkably turn back to grow straight up into the sky. Some of the curves reach out 3 to 9 feet sideways, but the trees are healthy and many grow to nearly 50 feet tall. These crooked pines are surrounded by a larger forest of straight-growing pines. There's no explanation as to why they're bent the way they are. The theories for this strange development range from weather conditions to human intervention, but no one knows for sure. The Hamza River is one of the longest and widest rivers in the world, and it sits right underneath the Amazon River itself. At a depth of 2.5 miles, this river flows a little more than a trickle compared to the Great River above it. The push of the Amazon River's water into the Atlantic is around 35 million gallons per second, while the Hamza only manages 1 million gallons per second. Either way, there's no choice but to go with the flow. Around the same length as the Amazon itself, 3,700 miles, it's the width that stunned the science world. It's 125 to 250 miles wide, compared to the Amazon's width of about 1/2 mile to 60 miles wide. The Cave of Crystals was discovered in 2000 when miners drained water from a zinc mine in Chihuahua, Mexico. The state, not the dog. What scientists found was an enchanting cave filled with colossal gypsum crystals that were larger than 33 feet and over 3 feet wide. They were so pure that scientists were unable to work out how old they were, but researchers believe they discovered a 50,000-year-old sample of bacteria inside one of the crystals. Also known as the River of Five Colors, Caño Cristales is one of the most amazing natural wonders in all of Colombia. The area is filled with waterfalls, pools, and caverns, but the river itself is the true wonder. Every year, between June and November, the river hypnotizes spectators with amazing yellows, greens, blues, blacks, and red shades to create a liquid rainbow. A red plant that grows in the riverbed is the main cause of this unique phenomenon. Other colors come from the black rocks, green algae, clear water, and yellow sand, producing a pearly effect. The colors change every year because of the plant's growth from rainfall, temperature, and sunlight. During the rest of the year, the riverbed appears in a dull green hue. Scientists in Hawaii discovered that red algae were making sounds in the waters around coral reefs. The noise was believed to come from the loud snapping shrimp, until researchers put the sound and presence of algae together and started monitoring the bubbles. As the algae use photosynthesis for food, they produce tiny bubbles that collect on their surfaces. When the bubbles separate off the plant, they make a ping or popping sound. Reefs can be smothered and suffocate if they're covered by too many algae. Discovering that photosynthesis makes a sound could be useful for the reef's preservation. The algae could provide early warnings for scientists, so they can stop these vulnerable areas from being overrun. After heavy rains and seismic activity hit Kenya's Great Rift Valley in March 2018, a vast chasm expanded across the land. The rift measured quite a few miles long and was over 50 feet wide in some parts. Essentially, it was tearing Africa in two. Africa sits on two tectonic plates, the Nubian and the Somali plate. Deep below Earth's surface, driven by the active mantle, the plates are being pulled apart. This creates the huge, extraordinary rifts we see on the surface. It will take millions of years for the large continent to actually separate into two pieces. I won't be around then. But when it does, it'll also create a new ocean basin. The Eucalyptus deglupta thrive in the tropical forests of Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Philippines, and they're like something straight out of a video game or fantasy movie. Growing up to an enormous height of 250 feet in its native environment, this one-of-a-kind tree has bark that displays green, bright blue, orange, purple, and red streaks as it ages, kinda like me. As strips of bark fall away, the tree's colors change, and the bright green inner bark is revealed. Off of the beautiful island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, there's a spectacular view that has to be seen to believe. You'll need to hop on a plane to get a bird's-eye view, though. What looks like an underwater waterfall is actually sand from the shores being pushed off of a high coastal shelf by ocean currents. It falls all the way into the deep dark depths of the ocean on the southernmost tip of the island. Most of the ocean waters around the island are only 26 to 490 feet deep, but this deep plunge drops down a few miles, creating the illusion of a waterfall. This oceanic shelf didn't exist a few million years ago, but seafloor spreading has created this quite recently. The walking trees of the Amazon are one of the most unique and puzzling ways plants move to get to the perfect spot for everything they need. These trees walk by allowing the new roots to replace the older ones while searching for more sunlight in the dense forest. As the roots fix themselves into the new soil, the tree bends towards the new roots, leaving the old roots to slowly rise. Traveling to a new place with better sunlight and more solid ground can take a couple of years. This is because they only move around 0.8 of an inch a day, or around 65 feet a year. Now you can just imagine this going on in your front yard. You plant the tree here, and next year it's all the way over there. Ah well. Down in southern Costa Rica, 300 stone petrospheres are dotted all over the forest. Some weigh as much as a bowling ball, while others can be up to 15 tons. Their purpose and how they were made so long ago are lost to us. Discovered in the 1930s, a lot of them were removed and transported around the world. It wasn't until the 1970s that we began to preserve and protect these stones. While the stones are mostly a mystery, archaeologists know they're made from granodiorite rock, similar to granite. If they were carved by a civilization, their near-perfect shape must have been made by chiseling away with small stones. Ethiopia's Danakil Depression is an environment that looks like it belongs on another planet. Filled with lava pools, bright neon-colored hot springs, and vast salt flats, it's also the contender for the hottest year-round temperature of 93 degrees Fahrenheit. Poisonous gases fill the area with hot springs filled with acid. Worse, it only receives up to 8 inches of annual rainfall. It's also one of the lowest places on the planet, at 410 feet below sea level. No wonder it's one of the most inhospitable places on the planet. Hey, sounds great. No crowds. Let's go. Hey, if you think Stonehenge is one of the oldest stone monuments ever, well, let me introduce you to Göbekli Tepe. Buckle up, we gotta travel to Turkey to meet this really old guy. Yeah, he's too old to travel. Jokes aside, Göbekli Tepe, an archaeological site located in southeastern Turkey that dates back to the Neolithic period around 10,000 BCE. It's considered to be one of the oldest and most significant archaeological discoveries in recent times. The site consists of a series of circular and rectangular structures made of stone pillars. Yeah, it does look like its younger brother Stonehenge. Some of those pillars are decorated with intricate carvings of animals and other symbols. Now, you maybe wonder, hey, why on earth did they make such a fascinating building? What was its purpose? Sorry, I got no answer for that. The purpose of the site is still unknown, but it is believed to have been a ceremonial center for the ancient people who lived in the area. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe has challenged long-held beliefs about the development of human civilization, as it suggests that complex societies may have emerged much earlier than previously thought. Okay, pack your stuff, our travel's just started. Next destination, Masada. It's an ancient fortress located in Israel on a plateau overlooking the Dead Sea. Hey, look at that view, spectacular, huh? It was built by King Herod the Great in the 1st century BCE, and it was very smartly built. Within the fortress, there were various facilities such as storehouses, barracks, a palace, and a set of cisterns capable of holding approximately 40,000 cubic meters of rainwater. People living there believed that the collected runoff from a single day's rainfall could provide sustenance for over 1,000 individuals for a period of 2 to 3 years. Access to the fortress was limited to 3 steep and winding paths leading up to fortified gates. Still, at one point, the fortress was occupied by people who had fled Jerusalem after the city was captured by the Romans. They held out against the invaders for several months, but eventually they were defeated. But these guys didn't surrender. The story of Masada has become a symbol of resistance and bravery. Today, Masada is a popular tourist attraction and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The next flight is going to be short. We're popping over to Egypt to see the Karnak Temple Complex. It's a vast ancient Egyptian temple complex located in the city of Luxor, Egypt. It was built over a period of 2,000 years and covers an area of more than 200 acres. The complex is dedicated to the worship of the deity Amun-Roka. Wait a minute, that should be Amun-Ra, and it was one of the most important religious centers in ancient Egypt. The Karnak Temple consists of several temples, chapels, and other buildings, including the Great Temple of Amun, the Temple of Khonsu, and the Temple of Ptah. Ptah! The Great Temple of Amun is the largest and most impressive temple in the complex, with massive columns, statues, and other decorations. One of the most famous features of the Karnak Temple complex is the Avenue of Sphinxes, which is a long avenue lined with Sphinx statues that leads from the entrance of the complex to the Great Temple of Amun. Another notable feature is the Hypostyle Hall, which is a massive hall with 134 columns that are over 70 feet high. The Karnak Temple Complex is a popular tourist attraction and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's considered one of the most important archaeological sites in Egypt and provides a fascinating glimpse into the religion and culture of ancient Egypt. Hey, we can't hop on the next flight and leave Egypt until we see the Pyramid of Djoser. It has another name, by the way. It's also known as the Step Pyramid. This ancient Egyptian site is located in Saqqara. It was built during the 27th century BCE for the pharaoh Djoser by his architect Imhotep, who is considered one of the most important figures in Egyptian history. People believe this pyramid is the first monumental structure built entirely of stone and is an important example of early Egyptian architecture. The pyramid originally stood at 203 feet tall and was surrounded by a complex of buildings and courtyards. It was constructed in 6 layers, each smaller than the one below it, giving it the distinctive step-like appearance. The pyramid was used as a burial place for Pharaoh Djoser and was surrounded by a vast necropolis that contained the tombs of many other important officials. The Grateful Dead? The Pyramid of Djoser has several renovations and additions over the centuries, including the addition of a limestone casing that covered the original step structure. However, much of the pyramid was destroyed over time, and today only the central core remains. Despite this, it remains an important archaeological site and a popular tourist attraction in Egypt. Alrighty, we're ready to move on. There's one more pretty recent discovery we gotta see today. The Tower of Jericho was only discovered during excavations in the 1950s and 60s. It's an ancient stone tower located in the city of Jericho in the West Bank. Just like Göbekli Tepe, this one is believed to be one of the oldest stone structures in the world, dating back to approximately 8000 BCE. The tower stands at over 28 feet tall. It's made up of 2 main sections, an inner tower and an outer tower, which are connected by a series of stairs. The purpose of the Tower of Jericho is not entirely clear, but it is believed to have served as a defensive structure or a watchtower. It may have also had religious significance, as it was located near a sacred spring. The Tower of Jericho is a significant archaeological site and has provided valuable insights into the early history of human civilization. It's open to visitors and is a popular destination for tourists interested in ancient history. Now, this ancient site even got attention from Netflix, and they made a movie where the action takes place in Mohenjo-Daro. This site was a major center of the Indus Valley civilization in present-day Pakistan. Mohenjo-Daro was one of the largest cities of the ancient world, with a population estimated to have been around 40,000 in its peak. Trust me, that must have been a crazy megalopolis back then. The city was notable for its advanced urban planning, with sophisticated drainage and sanitation systems, and its impressive architecture, including the Great Bath and the Granary. Mohenjo-Daro was abandoned around 1900 BCE, and its ruins were only rediscovered in the 1920s. Today, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and an important archaeological site for the study of ancient South Asian civilization. We're heading to a teeny-tiny country that has quite an impressive history. Welcome to Malta. The Tsigantia Temples are a Neolithic site located on the Mediterranean island of Gozo. They're probably one of the oldest freestanding structures in the world, dating back to around 3600 to 3200 BCE. The temples consist of two megalithic structures, each with multiple rooms and altars. The name Tsigantia means giant tower in Maltese, as people believe that only giants could have built such massive structures. The temples are believed to have been used for religious purposes and are considered to be an important example of prehistoric architecture. They were added to the UNESCO World Heritage List in 1980. Well, you must be pretty tired, but there's one more place we gotta visit today. Our plane is already landing in Armenia, and we're here to see the Temple of Garni. Look, this one is well preserved. This temple dates back to the 1st century CE. It was built by King Tiridates I as a dedication to the sun deity Mir. Sadly, the temple was destroyed in the 17th century during an earthquake, which is quite a common thing for this area, but it was later reconstructed in the 20th century. Today, it's a popular tourist attraction and is also listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Egyptian archaeologists made an extraordinary discovery near Cairo just recently. Drumroll, please. The most ancient and most complete mummy yet discovered in the country. Yes, they were keeping it under wraps. The 4,300-year-old mummy was found in a group of tombs close to the Step Pyramid of Djoser, dating back to the Egyptian Old Kingdom. It was covered in layers of gold. The team also found several other tombs, including one belonging to an ancient Egyptian official and another belonging to a secret keeper who had the power to perform special ceremonies. Another interesting tomb was that of a writer, which featured the largest statues ever found in the area. This vast burial site is also home to more than a dozen pyramids and resting grounds. Probably one of the most famous mummies in the world is that of Hatshepsut. She ruled Egypt like a boss for around 20 years, building all sorts of impressive buildings and creating new trade routes. But when archaeologist Howard Carter found her tomb in the Valley of the Kings, her sarcophagus was empty. However, Carter did find two coffins in another tomb, one of which belonged to Hatshepsut's wet nurse and the other to an unknown woman. In 2006, a team of specialists decided to investigate whether that mysterious lady was the queen herself. They found a molar tooth in a wooden box with Hatshepsut's name on it, and when they compared it to a gap in the mummy's mouth, it was a perfect match. Ramses II was a pretty impressive ruler, but it was his mummy that eventually made history. Now, we don't hear too much about his daddy. Okay, I'll stop. Ramses is considered to be the most powerful pharaoh in all of Egypt, as he reigned for a whopping 6 decades. He also lived to be over 90 years old. Now that's pretty amazing, considering the time he lived in. Ramses II supposedly had over 100 offspring too. Talk about a big family. When he passed away, his body was originally buried in the Valley of the Kings, but some sneaky guys tried to rob his tomb of all his treasures. Officials back in the day weren't having any of that though, so they moved his body to a secret location to keep it safe. Fast forward to the 1800s, and Ramses II's mummy was discovered along with a bunch of other rulers and important officials. But it wasn't in the best condition, so archaeologists flew it to Paris to get it, pampered. Problem was, he couldn't just be transported into another country. The only solution available was to give Ramses II his own passport. His occupation was listed as king, and the document even featured his photo. Most mummies aren't necessarily known for having the most hydrated skin. But that of an ancient woman, also known as Lady Di, proves otherwise. No, not that Lady Di. This wealthy lady from ancient times was discovered in an ornate tomb in 1971, and she looked fabulous, if we can say so about a mummy. Thanks to the special conditions in her tomb, like the moisture in the environment and the lack of oxygen, her body was almost perfectly preserved. Her skin was soft, her hair was on point, and she was still flexible. The museum that now proudly displays her mummy also shows a ton of fancy items that were buried with her, like dinnerware and musical instruments. Archaeologists investigated the mummy further and discovered that she passed away from a heart attack at around 50 years old. Even though it hasn't been around for over 2,000 years, Lady Di is still making history. The mummy of Otzi the Iceman was discovered in the Alps in 1991. Austrian authorities initially thought he was a modern mountaineer because he was so well preserved. Turns out, he was actually from the Copper Age. He was found in a mountain pass over 10,000 feet above sea level. Through studying his mummy, we've learned so much about life in Copper Age Europe. For example, we know that he was a native of Central Europe and enjoyed eating meat. He also suffered from arthritis, narrowing arteries, and intestinal problems. But he likely used acupuncture and medicinal herbs to treat these conditions. And apparently, he was pretty handy with tools. He sharpened them just days before his untimely demise. Who knows if he was expecting trouble or just getting ready for some routine work. Now, King Tut and his story is most likely the one that made all mummies famous. This pharaoh passed away at the young age of 19, more than 3,000 years ago. But his mummy is still one of the most well-known in the world. When his tomb was opened in 1922, people went wild because it was still intact, unlike many other royal tombs. It had some seriously blinged-out coffins, including one made of solid gold. Not only did Tut's tomb give us a glimpse into ancient Egyptian history, but his mummy also taught us a lot about the time he lived in. DNA analysis helped identify his parents and revealed that the pharaoh had a rare bone disorder that might have made walking a bit tough. Now, Ginger is most likely one of the coolest mummies you'll ever hear about. He's like a time traveler from 5,000 years ago who's still looking fly with his golden hair and perfectly preserved nails. Ginger was discovered in Egypt and is believed to be the earliest known mummified body. Before people even knew about mummification, they used to place bodies in shallow graves in the hot, dry sand. And since the sand absorbed all the water, bacteria couldn't reproduce and the body was preserved naturally. Now, scientists are not sure if Ginger's preservation was intentional or not, but since he was buried with some pottery vessels, it's likely that whoever buried him knew some serious preservation techniques. If you want to meet Ginger in person, he's currently chilling at the British Museum. One Dutch art collector bought a statue from Asia and ended up finding a weird discovery. The statue contained a mummy hidden inside. Unfortunately, the body was too fragile to move, so they had to leave it there. The coolest part is that this mummy is over 1,000 years old and was on display for 200 years before being encased in the statue. When scientists did a CT scan, they found out that the mummy was filled with paper scraps covered in writings. Experts think he might have done this thing called self-mummification, which is a pretty intense process involving a special diet and tea that makes your body less prone to bacteria. Only a few people could handle this ritual, and those who managed to do that were seriously respected. No other Egyptian queen has baffled scientists and historians like the stunning Nefertiti. Based on her statues, she was known for her slender neck, wide eyes, and high cheekbones. Her name translates to "the beautiful woman has come." Talk about living up to your name, huh? Even though she wasn't a pharaoh herself, Nefertiti still managed to leave a lasting impression. Written records suggest that, as a wife and queen, she held an incredibly influential role. Because of her power, she was indeed admired, but she also managed to make quite a lot of enemies throughout her life. She was also related to King Tut, but not biologically. Rather, she was his stepmother. So far, locals have yet to identify her mummy, but that may soon change. A local Egyptologist who has been busy excavating tombs in the Valley of the Kings has found two mummies that he believes could be Nefertiti and her daughter. According to specialists, we may soon finally get a definitive answer about the identity of these two mummies. And if one of them does turn out to be Nefertiti, we could be in for a real treat. DNA analysis and CT scans of the mummy could give us the most complete and accurate image of the queen that we've ever seen. It's crazy to think that we've only scratched the surface of what lies beneath modern-day Egypt. Nefertiti ruled during a time of great power and prosperity in Egypt, but unfortunately passed away in a period of social turmoil, leading to her gravesite being lost. Now, where's my mummy?
It was April 10, 1912. Richard had just departed from Southampton, England, aboard the most famous ship of the time, dubbed the Unsinkable. Since he had just witnessed a near collision with the SS City of New York, he decided to write to his wife and report the unfortunate and frightening event. "My dearest Sal," he wrote, "we got away yesterday after a lot of trouble." Little did he know that a mere 4 days later, both his pen and the ship he was on would be lost forever at the bottom of the North Atlantic Ocean. Was this some sort of bad omen? Did Richard actually foresee what was about to happen to the ship he was on? In case you haven't figured it out by now, Mr. Richard Geddes was aboard the Titanic on the day that he wrote the letter to his wife. On April 14, 1912, the ship seemed to have been lost forever. Along with it, so many secrets and treasures have settled at the bottom of the ocean. It took until 1985 for the Titanic's wreck to be finally rediscovered using state-of-the-art sonar technology. Ever since then, they've managed to recover thousands of items from the Titanic, and many of them went on display or auction. Things like jewelry, a life jacket, a menu from the ship's restaurant, or even a sample square of carpet from the first-class stateroom have all captivated the public's attention, just like the many stories of the people on board. Scientists have even tried to come up with strategies to get the Titanic back up altogether to properly study it and stop it from getting more and more damaged at the bottom of the ocean. Some have suggested filling the wreck with ping pong balls to make it float, while others even considered injecting it with 180,000 tons of Vaseline. Another idea was to use 450,000 tons of liquid nitrogen to trap it in an iceberg that would float to the surface. But they eventually had to let go of all these potential strategies since the Titanic is way too fragile to ever be recovered. The Titanic may be one of the most interesting ships lying at the bottom of the ocean, at least in popular culture, but deep-sea divers have a lot of other stories to share. Planes also sometimes find their way to the bottom of the ocean. Deep-sea divers in Oahu, Hawaii came across the wreckage of an F-4U Corsair plane. It seems to have crashed into the ocean in 1946, as it didn't have sufficient fuel. If you can dive deep enough, you might even stumble upon statues and lost artifacts, like those found in the world's only underwater archaeological park off the coast of Naples, Italy. It features the ruins of the ancient Roman city of Baia. The underwater statues found here are breathtaking, to say the least. In an ironic twist of events, some of the equipment we intended to use to get us to the moon was lost at the bottom of the sea for a very long time. But how did that happen? Beginning from the late 1960s and ending in the early 70s, many Apollo rockets were launched to orbit the Earth and the Moon. When reaching altitudes of about 38 miles, the first portion of the spacecraft, including the engines, needed to separate. People thought these components got destroyed or lost forever. But were they really? In 2012, a team of specialists discovered a bunch of rocket engines 14,000 feet off the coast of Florida. They have since gone through a 2-year renovation plan and are now on display at Seattle's Museum of Flight. Can you imagine stumbling upon a whole city underwater? Back in 2001, a lost city was discovered in the Gulf of Cambay, off the coast of India. Some archaeologists believe it to be the oldest city in history. By comparison, it's almost the size of Manhattan and features massive walls and even plazas. They stumbled upon pieces of sculpture, artwork, and even what looked like ancient wooden furniture, believed to date back up to 9,500 years ago and 5,000 years older than any city previously discovered. Okay, how about an underwater river? I can't even imagine what that would look like, but some deep divers claim to have seen it south of Tulum, Mexico. Is that even possible? Well, not really, since the Cenote Angelita Cave is not a true river, but a very special type of optical illusion. It's formed by a halocline, meaning a cloud of hydrogen sulfide at the bottom of this underwater cave. Turns out you can actually swim right through this cloud, which makes you feel like you're swimming through a flowing body of water. Not all things discovered underwater are inanimate objects. Some of them are actually quite scary sea creatures. A jellyfish might not be on your list of things to look out for if you can avoid the stings. But this giant one, also known as a lion's mane jellyfish, is the largest known species of its kind. In all fairness, you'll only uncover it if you happen to dive into the waters of the Arctic, Northern Atlantic, and Northern Pacific Oceans. You surely won't miss it, since it stretches across 120 feet from the top to the bottom of its tentacles. When it comes to deep-sea diving, a lot of people are looking to discover some lost treasure. One diver was lucky enough to have hit the literal jackpot when he came upon nearly $1 million worth of treasure on the bottom of the seabed. That was back in 2015, when this lucky diver was swimming just off the coast of Florida. What did he find, you might ask? Well, about 51 gold coins, 40 feet of gold chain, and a rare single coin that was tailored for the King of Spain, Philip V. Speaking of people looking for lost treasures, divers also sometimes found pirate ships. They discovered one of these pirate shipwrecks in 2015 off the coast of Colombia. It dates back to the 18th century. The value of this forgotten ship was estimated to be between $4 billion and $17 billion, as it contained treasures, precious stones, gold, and countless other really valuable items. By comparison, a whole island in the Bahamas is up for grabs at $75 million. A computer is the last thing you'd ever expect to discover underwater, right? And this was no regular computer, but an ancient one. And yet, someone stumbled upon it between 1900 and 1901 on the spot of a shipwreck located off one Greek island. Researchers believe this weird stone contraption to be the earliest form of a computer. It was designed to serve many purposes, such as predicting astronomical positions and eclipses on the calendar. Since humanity lost most of the technology used back then, it was wonderful to rediscover it so many years later. It let us piece together many of the ancient Greeks' accomplishments. The computer is now at the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, should you ever want to check it out in person. This has to be one of the most mysterious places on Earth. It's called the Mariana Trench, and it's the deepest part of the Earth's oceans. We really don't know how deep it is, since it's so difficult to measure, but it's somewhere around 7 miles deep and 5 times longer than the Grand Canyon. They first studied this massive underwater hole back in 1875 using a weighted rope. Back in 2012, a Canadian film director named James Cameron reached the bottom of the trench in the submersible vessel Deep Sea Challenger. Some of the most bizarre creatures on the planet call this place their home, including the Dumbo octopus, the sea cucumber, and the goblin shark. The Mariana Trench took its name after the nearby Mariana Islands, which are named Las Marianas in honor of the Spanish Queen Mariana of Austria. They say this place is swarming with money. It's been stored there for centuries, but no one managed to take it away from this island. Treasure hunters have been bewitched with this place since 1795. Many people have tried their luck looking for the treasure that could be hidden there by the Spanish pirates or even by the Knights Templar. But today, it's impossible to get there, as it's a private place, so all you can do is book an ocean tour around this island. Otherwise, you can take a peek at it in a TV reality show starring the Legina brothers, Rick and Marty, who are a team of enthusiasts looking for the treasures of Oak Island in Nova Scotia, Canada. Yeah, seems like there's no place where TV producers can't get to. One of the most famous discoveries out there was the so-called Money Pit. Despite the promising name, it wasn't full of money. Now we have to jump to 200 years ago. The Money Pit was first found by a 16-year-old kid in 1795. One day, Daniel McGinnis went fishing at Oak Island. He saw a tree there. Unsurprisingly, it was an oak, and it had weird markings. They didn't seem to be natural, so Daniel decided to check the area. He then saw a sunken patch of ground and started digging immediately. His two friends helped him out, but instead of treasures, the guys only found logs placed underground at regular intervals. It looked like a place where someone could hide money or jewels, but nothing precious was found. However, there was something curious down that pit. Someone found a granite stone there, and it had an engraved inscription on it. There were many attempts to decode it, but most of them ended up in failure. There's one translation though, and it says, 40 feet below, 2 million pounds are buried. Yeah, McGinnis and his friends should have dug harder. The next fun thing about the Money Pit is the coconut fiber found down there. They say that large amounts of this fiber were found at a depth of 60 feet. It may not surprise you, but I have to remind you of one thing. Oak Island is in Nova Scotia, Canada. Coconut trees do not grow there. The nearest one is about 1,500 miles from Nova Scotia, which makes it obvious that someone brought this fiber purposefully. Researchers came up with an idea that coconut fiber could have been used to make ropes and lower all the treasures down the pit. Next up, we have not one, but two mysteries. In the late 1800s, the Oak Island Treasure Company was thoroughly inspecting and excavating the island. Everyone believed something enormous was hidden there. These guys managed to drill 153 feet underground. That's like 15 stop signs stacked one on top of the other. You might have guessed that they didn't find pounds of gold and diamonds, but they found a manuscript. There's a theory claiming that it's one of Shakespeare's lost manuscripts. Some scientists believe that it was hidden there by the writer and scientist Francis Bacon, the true author of Shakespeare's works. Yeah, rumor has it was Francis and not William who wrote all the plays and sonnets. But there's no proof it was really so. The Money Pit may be the most popular shaft on Oak Island, but it's not the only one, and it's not the first. Before the Money Pit discovery, treasure hunters were drilling at Smith's Cove. While damming there, they found a wooden piece. It was a U-shaped formation that had Roman numerals. After a more thorough inspection, the specialists realized it was supposedly dated to 1769. The Money Pit was discovered 26 years later. This fact created many speculations that this structure might have been part of the real shaft with treasures everyone was looking for. Now, look at this Templar coin. It wasn't the first discovery on the island, but it was crucial in some way. Even if it may not sound like a big deal today, in medieval times, those coins would amass an insane amount of wealth. They were typically stored in European fortresses. For the treasure hunters, this coin was a sure sign there was more to be found on the island. The logic is simple. If there's one coin of that kind, there must be something else. And they were right. It wasn't the only Templar discovery. On the southwest shore of the island, a crossbow bolt was found. Experts say it dates back to the 13th century. But, once again, that wasn't something the treasure hunters were after. Some more coins were found on the island. Rick and Marty Legina retrieved this precious piece from a swamp. The coin is made of copper, and this time, it originated from Spain. When it was found, the Legina brothers could only see the number 8 engraved on it. But later on, some experts studied this coin and claimed it was made sometime around the 17th century. They managed to clean it well and saw the date 1652 engraved on the back of this coin. There's a theory stating that Spanish explorers found some treasure but hid it instead of taking it to the king. So maybe This coin just dropped out of the chest full of coins and jewels and is part of the treasure everyone was after. Or someone could have accidentally lost it while looking for the treasure. Who knows? One more famous treasure hunter is Gary Drayton. Gary and his team, together with Rick Lagina, came across 2 coins while metal detecting the island. Those were 17th century King Charles II Britannia coins. One of them had a very clear inscription on it, stating that the coin was minted back in 1771. Another swamp treasure of possibly Spanish origin is also here. This time, it's a silver ring. A specialist studied it closely and reported that it had been repaired twice. The ring was once made bigger, and it was also made smaller ones. It's decorated with a floral design, which was popular in Europe in the 1730s. Among all the other curious things, Rick and Marty Lagina found a silver button at Isaac Point. The button's pretty old. It supposedly dates back to the middle of the 18th century, and the notorious money pit was discovered later. This is why it wasn't a big deal of a find. It could simply belong to some farmer peacefully raising livestock on the island. There's no official record of any chest full of gems and coins found on Oak Island, but enthusiasts did find some jewels there. First off, the team found a brooch with a magnificent red gem. They mistakenly thought it was a ruby, but a professional gemologist stated it was a garnet. The piece was made of silver, and it's pretty old. Experts believe it was made around the 15 or 1600s. Another brooch they found didn't have any gems on it, but it had an intricate design. It's a brooch with a leaf design and an ornate rope. There are 13 branches of the leaf, which instantly created more mystery to the whole treasure hunting. First off, there's a carving with a 13-branched tree on a rock on the north shore of this island. What's more, many people believe that the number 13 is important to the Knights Templar. The enthusiasts also found a brooch not far away from the place where Daniel McGinnis, the guy who found the money pit, lived. The brooch was shown to a professional gemologist, Charles Luton Brain. He had to break it to the team that there were no gems adorning this piece of jewelry. In fact, the stone that seemed to be a gem was just a piece of glass. It was processed using a special technique though, so it was leaded glass. The enthusiasts decided to study the brooch even more and found out that part of the brooch was made of gold. The specialists claim that the brooch dates back to the 14th century. Was it the treasure everyone was looking for? This hidden village is called Aogashima. It's located right in the middle of a volcanic crater. You can find it to the south of Japan, in northernmost Micronesia. The story goes that a volcano erupted in the Philippine Sea in the 1780s, causing a lot of harm to a nearby community. Half of the population managed to escape the massive eruption and came back years later to rebuild their village. At the moment, about 160 people are living there peacefully, even though the volcano is still considered to be active. Huacachina in Peru lies in one of the driest climates in the world, and still, it's a beautiful town, surrounded by lush palm trees. It also has a lagoon, which is said to have special healing properties. The settlement has a little over 90 residents that manage small businesses. Most of them use sand as their primary resource. Some offer sandboarding services or even provide luxury dinners in the desert. For over 500 years, a small group of people has been living on a cliffside of a peak called the Green Mountain. It's one of the most remote places in Oman and in the whole world. The only way to reach the settlement is on foot, by mule, or by all-terrain vehicle. It's called Al Sogara, and you need to hike around 20 minutes up a steep stone staircase to get there. The village appeared back when the locals chiseled their houses into the mountain stone to protect themselves from storms and the cold. 5 families of the Al-Sharaki tribe still call this place home, about 25 people in total. A lot of other villages like this one can be found in the region, but Al Sogara is special because it's the only one that is still inhabited. Up until 14 years ago, there wasn't even electricity or telephone lines here. The nearest road you could drive on was 9 miles away. Since there were no schools, people had to learn how to read and write at home from their elders. To this day, the villagers continue their traditional practice of building their homes by carving them directly into the mountain rock. One of the most beautiful Greek gems is Monemvasia, a castle town located in southeastern Peloponnese. It was designed to be invisible from the mainland for added protection. You can only see it from the sea, and to reach it, you need to follow a narrow pathway that connects it to the mainland. That's actually how its name came into being. It translates to a single passage. Monemvasia was built in the Middle Ages, exclusively carved in the mountain rock. These days, a lot of old mansions have been turned into guest houses and boutique hotels. Not only is the architecture amazing and beautifully preserved, but it's also surrounded by crystal clear waters. A town with no roads? Pack your bags for Giethoorn in the Netherlands, if you don't mind traveling by boat. The town is very peaceful, probably because everyone here travels by canals. Even the mail gets delivered by water. Since there's no car traffic and people rarely move around, the town is really quiet. So quiet that the loudest sound one can hear is the quacking of a duck every now and then. It initially started as a movie set, but Hobbiton in New Zealand still exists, even after the filming of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit was finished. Tours to the charming set town are now available. There are 44 Hobbit holes in total, though only a few of them are actually open to the public. The isolated cliffside village of Gasadalar in the Faroe Islands has a population of only 11 people. It's mostly known for its scenic waterfall, which falls directly into the Atlantic Ocean. You could only reach it on foot, hiking through the mountains not so long ago. However, a tunnel has been constructed recently, making the place easily accessible by car. The 1980s musical Popeye had a custom set built on Malta. It wasn't taken down after the filming had been finished, and Popeye Village is now home to groups of beautifully colored wooden buildings and a company of actors. There's a lot of fun stuff to do there, like watch theater shows, go on boat rides, visit museums, or simply explore the creative village. The oldest and most photographed village in Austria is called Hallstatt. It's a hidden European gem with beautifully preserved old buildings and a subterranean salt lake. It's also home to a museum with artifacts as old as 7,000 years and the world's oldest salt mine. Fort Bourtange in the Netherlands is a small establishment shaped like a star. Creative parts aside, it was built this way for defensive purposes. It gave the guards of the fort a strategic advantage because they had a perfect 360-degree view. These days, the construction is perfectly preserved, including its old buildings, cobblestone streets, wooden windmills, and sophisticated bridges. In Morocco, there's a traditional earthen village made entirely from clay bricks. You can find it in a valley close to the Atlas Mountains, 32 miles from the capital of Morocco. Merchants who followed the trans-Saharan trade route went through this town, carrying spices and gold. As the trade route became less and less popular, many of these fortresses were abandoned and are now preserved relics. It's one of the best places for skiing in the world, but it's still hidden from the public. No wonder the locals call it the secret side of the valley. Located in Austria, the tiny village of Varth has only a couple hundred inhabitants. Not only is it the snowiest village on Earth, but it also has access to one of the biggest ski slopes in the world. Its popularity increased a bit in 2013 when the construction of a high-speed road was completed nearby. Birano in Italy is one of the most colorful islands in the world. Because of its vibrant colors, it almost looks tropical. It features emerald green waters, beautiful houses, and a 17th century bell tower. Its lace-making tradition brought Leonardo da Vinci to the island back in the 1400s. He bought a piece of cloth there and later used it for the design of the famous Dome of Milan. If you have a UK passport, You must be familiar with the beautiful small town of Byberry, as its scenery is featured in your ID. It's surely one of the most charming towns in Europe, as it's made up of stone buildings standing on the River Colne. The image in the UK passports is that of Arlington Row, a line of weavers' cottages that date back to the 14th century. The town of Coober Pedy in Australia is partially underground. It all began back in 1915, when opal deposits were found in the area. To this day, the town is still the biggest opal mine in the world. People living there figured out that it would be more comfortable for them to stick to the underground, as the temperatures outside can reach 125 degrees Fahrenheit. So, the settlement now has underground stores and galleries. Coober Pedy is also home to the world's first 4-star underground hotel. To visit the most remote location in the whole world, you'll need to prepare yourself for quite a journey. If you're traveling from the United States, for example, the easiest route is a 15-hour-long flight to Cape Town, South Africa, followed by a 6-day boat ride. Only after that will you reach Tristan da Cunha. Or you can take a month-long cruise across the South Atlantic Ocean, whatever works better for you. Planning in advance is a must, since there are only 9 boat trips to the island yearly. The island itself is just 7 miles long. Sitting right in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean, it covers a mere 37.8 square miles. The 300 residents are all farmers. They have the internet, but it's really slow. As for a phone network or a local newspaper, neither is available. The inhabitants of the island speak a dialect of English that is used by the smallest number of people in the world.
If you come across a well in Portugal, resist the temptation to gaze into its depths. The inverted tower in the enigmatic city of Sintra sends chills through those who encounter it as it spirals down a daunting 88 feet into the underground. It certainly wasn't designed to collect water, yet its true purpose remains a closely guarded secret. Dating back to around 1904, this well could have been involved in a mysterious initiation tradition from the Knights Templar. The Templars had faded into history almost 6 centuries before the construction of this pit, but their enigmatic traditions were revived by later generations. So one theory says that candidates seeking to join the group back then had to confront their deepest fears by facing this well, descending its spiral staircase blindfolded. When they reached the bottom of the inverted tower, they removed their blindfolds and were faced with this frightening sight. The only way out of this dark labyrinth was to keep looking up and following the light. Now imagine yourself browsing the shelves of a used bookstore until you find a book with an alphabet you've never seen before. You decide to use an image translation app but find no matches. Intrigued, you buy the book. Then you show it to your friends and family, but nobody recognizes that alphabet. Rare book dealer Winfried Vanish probably experienced the same frustration back in 1912, when he acquired what would later become the most enigmatic book in the world. The work is known today as the Voynich manuscript, and it's written entirely in an unknown language that no one has deciphered yet. The pages of this 15th century codex are filled with botanical drawings, but these aren't typical daisies or roses. In fact, they don't resemble any plant species that we know of. What makes things even stranger is the illustrations of unfamiliar constellations and women swimming in green baths. Delving deeper into the realm of mysterious texts, we set off on a journey to the Qumran Caves near the Salt Sea in the Middle East. In 1952, a team of archaeologists stumbled upon 2 scrolls made of highly oxidized copper at the site. Unrolling them was a major challenge, so they decided to cut the scrolls into 23 parts to investigate them. Imagine their surprise to see Hebrew words like gold and silver popping up. But no, it wasn't an ancient invoice. It was more like a treasure map, pointing the way to over $1 million. Unfortunately, the treasure was never found. Not for lack of trying, though. You see, the quest isn't as easy as it may appear. Some of the copper scroll's vocabulary is technical, and some geographical locations remain a mystery. There's also one last possibility. Perhaps it's all a work of fiction, like a pirate tale from the old days. People talk about Mona Lisa's almost haunting stare that seems to follow you no matter where you stand. But here's a quick question. Does she have eyebrows? You got it right if you said no, and her complete lack of eyebrows adds another layer of mystique to her gaze. The most common explanation is that beauty standards were different, and perhaps plucking the hairs above the eyes was a thing around 1503. But take a look at other Italian paintings from that time, like La Schiavona or Portrait of a Young Girl. Yep, eyebrows. So, not everyone was entirely pleased with this theory, like French inventor Pascal Cotte. He spent 3,000 hours analyzing scans of the painting to dig through all the layers of Leonardo da Vinci's masterpiece. Now he claims that the Mona Lisa once had eyebrows, but they disappeared over time due to cleanings and restorations. Some historians, however, still question his findings, which means that Mona Lisa's style, or lack of it, remains an unsolved mystery. So, you decide to travel to Rio de Janeiro, and everyone tells you that Sugarloaf Mountain is a must-see. When you spot the mountain from a distance, you realize that the stone has a cavity. But around noon, the whole view changes. The shadow in that cavity takes the shape of a bird, an ibis to be precise. A local legend links this bird shape to the ancient Egyptian deity Thoth, as if the ancient Egyptians once visited Rio de Janeiro and were somehow inspired by the natural phenomenon. But it's probably just a big coincidence. I mean, literally. The real mystery, however, lies in the waters around Sugarloaf Mountain. In the 80s, archaeologist Robert Marks got a tip from locals about a treasure hidden beneath Guanabara Bay. He dove in and found quite a few Roman amphorae, you know, those ancient vases with two handles. His discovery could potentially provide evidence of a Roman shipwreck that might have reached Brazil 17 centuries before the Portuguese even set foot there. However, he couldn't proceed with his research, and to this day, the idea of the Roman presence on Brazil's coast remains uncertain. The true location of Cleopatra's tomb isn't the only ancient Egyptian mystery. Many secrets are carved into the walls of ancient structures, like in the Temple of Seti I. Take a close look at this hieroglyph, and you'll notice that it resembles a modern-day helicopter. Look to the right, and you'll see an engraving that looks like a submarine. Odd, right? The most reasonable explanation for this has to do with the legacies of different rulers. When a new pharaoh came to power, they had their own hieroglyphs added over the original ones. But this is still a topic of debate, as some Egyptologists believe that these mysterious hieroglyphs may represent some kind of ancient technology. The same applies to the Dendera light. The image found in the underground passageway of the Hathor Temple is a subject of significant controversy in Egyptian history. Some researchers suggest that the inscription simply represents a rising sun, while others interpret it as evidence of some kind of modern lighting system. And it does indeed resemble Crookes' tube, one of the early experiments with electrical discharges. Although there's no concrete evidence of ancient Egyptians having modern electricity, some historians believe that this theory could help explain why many discovered tombs don't have any residues left behind from the use of oil lamps or candles. A lot has been said about the mysterious pyramids of Egypt, but many people tend to forget that other inexplicable structures had already existed even before them. Our next stop takes us to Turkey. The top of a hill known as Göbekli Tepe, near the city of Urfa, holds an ancient secret. It features more than 20 circular stone enclosures dated back over 11,000 years. Many of these have heavily carved stone T-shaped pillars adorned with eerie human figures with folded hands. The most accepted theory is that it's the world's first temple, likely used for rituals or social events. But the greatest mystery lies in how it was built. as this site existed before the domestication of animals or the use of metal tools. So the construction must have been very difficult, challenging our understanding of the historical timeline. Now, I hope you're not afraid of heights, because we're about to take a flight over the Nazca Lines. You've probably already heard about these massive, mysterious drawings etched into an arid region of Peru. They come in many different shapes, like a spider, a monkey, and even a Google-eyed ET, that is probably just a fisher. Anyway, this story got some fresh chapters in 2022 when an additional 168 new drawings were discovered. The original ones could only be seen from the air, but these new ones are much smaller and can be observed from the ground. However, one thing they have in common is that their purpose remains totally unclear. Some might call them the largest-scale calendar in the world. Others suggest that they served as a tool for agricultural purposes. Of course, many theories have emerged in an attempt to give the Nazca Lines a meaning, but the truth is that they remain some of the most important unsolved mysteries in history.
Tunnels, metro, underground systems, and even secret passageways to the houses of the rich and famous. Why else do we need tunnels, you may wonder? To hide. Many cities have underground tunnels and even underground doppelgangers. Now let's make it clear. Those passages are normally not connected, contrary to the popular rumor claiming that it was possible to get from Scotland to Turkey using underground passageways built around 5,000 years ago. I mean, it sounds insane even today. Imagine building it back in the day. These tunnels have an official name, the Erdstall Tunnels, and they were most likely built in the Middle Ages. However, we still don't have the exact information about the date. The highest concentration of those tunnels are in Bavaria, Germany, but there are many of them in Great Britain and France too. Erdstall tunnels, a unique type of earthen passage found globally, are characterized by their narrow, oval-shaped corridors and tight choke points, known as schlups, or slip-outs. Despite speculation, their purpose remains a mystery. However, some of those tunnels have fireplaces and even vents, which might mean those were used primarily for shelter. Dating back to the Middle Ages, possibly as early as the 12th century, Erdstall tunnels lack archaeological signs and historical records, so it's not a surprise that there are many rumors about their use. Some scientists are sure those were storage spaces, though their narrowness makes this impractical. Another idea is that they provided hiding spots for farmers during tribal raids. However, their single entry point raises doubts about their effectiveness in evading threats. Now, if you're feeling like Indiana Jones and want to venture into those tunnels, you're in luck. A few structures, like the Erdstall Radkobluken in Austria, welcome visitors to explore these enigmatic structures. Most of them are closed to the public eye, though. The origins of Erdstall tunnels remain largely unknown, just like their real functions. And if you think, hey, it's the 21st century here, we can study pretty much everything, well, you're wrong. What makes these tunnels hard to study are the tight confines. Traditional surveying methods often prove inadequate in such spaces. To solve this problem, scientists use a handheld device that integrates an RGB camera, a gyroscope, and high-resolution depth sensors, allowing them to capture intricate details of the tunnels. They also use modern techniques like 3D surveying in hopes of uncovering the true origins and purposes of those tunnels. One hypothesis even suggests they may have been poorly conceived dwellings, abandoned when their inadequacies became apparent. Still, not everyone quite agrees with this idea. Other theories suggest they served spiritual purposes, while the most intriguing idea speculates that those tunnels may be remnants of extraterrestrial civilizations. Experts believe they may have been used for practical matters, such as granaries or hiding spots from looters. As we don't have exact info on who built it and when, it may be pretty much anyone, even a sloth. Nope, I'm not a lunatic. Sloths can build giant tunnels. Check this out. In 2009, A farmer in southern Brazil was driving his tractor through a cornfield when it suddenly sank into the ground. He quickly discovered he had broken through the top of an underground tunnel. When researchers came to investigate, they found a tunnel around 6.5 feet high and the same 6.5 feet wide, extending about 50 feet long, right beneath the farmer's house. When they looked closer, they instantly saw deep claw marks on the walls. That was the proof the tunnel wasn't human-made. So that thing the farmer uncovered was a megafauna paleoburrow, a prehistoric tunnel dug by ancient creatures like giant ground sloths or giant armadillos from over 10,000 years ago. I know, it's hard to imagine those beasts, but let me help you. Take a hamster. Now, increase it to the size of an elephant. Don't forget, this 13-foot-tall hamster could also walk on 2 legs. During their time, around 15 million to 10,000 years ago, many species of sloths and giant armadillos roamed the Americas, some even digging similar tunnels. Today, many of these tunnels are filled with sediment, though some remain clear, similar to the one the farmer discovered. This 2009 find sparked significant interest, leading to the discovery of over 1,500 paleoburrows across southern Brazil, making it the era with the highest concentration of such sites worldwide. But no one knows exactly why there are so many of them in southern Brazil. While some paleoburrows exist throughout South America, none have been found in North America, which is weird since those huge sloths roamed the entire continent. The exact purpose of these large tunnels remains a mystery, but scientists believe they may have served as nursing spaces, temperature regulation, or hibernation areas. Tunnels likely developed over centuries as successive generations of sloths and armadillos expanded them. Now, let's take a look at fugus. No, not the Japanese fatal delicacy, and no, not a town in New Guinea. To see them, we gotta travel to the UK. So fugus are underground structures too, but they don't look exactly like tunnels. They are dry stone structures. They look as if a cave had been decorated with stones from the inside. There are only around 15 of them found so far, and most of them are located in Cornwall. According to the estimates, those tunnels were built about 2,400 years ago, and they're still in pristine condition, which is truly fascinating. I mean, back in the day, people had no cool machinery whatsoever, yet their structures still last. And if you dare to buy an apartment today, well, chances are you won't be too happy about the quality. Going back to our fugus, there's nothing extraordinary about their supposed purpose. They could be used for spiritual purposes, as a place to hide, or a food storage. The latest application, though, is a bit weird. I guess it's not a secret for anyone that England is famous for its excessive humidity. And if you want to store your food properly, you gotta avoid the humidity at all costs. Otherwise, say welcome to mold and fungi. But ancient people weren't dull-witted at all, or they wouldn't have survived, and you and I wouldn't be around now. So they might have adapted those fugus to store just some products, those that already had natural molds in them, assisting in the preservation of perishable food, like milk, butter, and cheese. But hey, those are just speculations. The true reason why they were built remains unknown. What makes fugus unique is that they are intentionally built tunnels, not just excavated mines like those in Wales. They were crafted by digging deep trenches, lining them with stone slabs, covering them with capstones, and then filling over them, all of which took significant time and effort. Still, no matter how hard those were to construct, cities around the globe are often built over intricate tunnel systems, each unique to its location. For instance, Paris is famous for its extensive underground quarries, which were abandoned years ago, but still pose a risk of collapse in certain areas above. London boasts one of the largest tunnel networks in the world, including many that were specifically created for military purposes. In New York City, there are rumors of secret tunnels, while Los Angeles has old tunnels from the Prohibition era used for speakeasies. Many other cities also have their share of enigmatic tunnels, and surprisingly, Florida is no exception. It happened in the year 2011 in Ybor City. Near a former post office, flooding uncovered something weird, a section of an unknown structure. Back then, people didn't pay much attention to that, so it took another 7 years to discover something truly fascinating. This historic neighborhood was founded in the 1880s, but it remained unknown until 2018 that it also has a hidden tunnel network. We only learned of it because of renovation work. The exact purpose, of course, is unknown, but most scientists are pretty sure that they serve to connect to early gaming spots and the port of Tampa. Figuring out how extensive the tunnel network is tricky. In 2018, a historic home in Seminole Heights revealed locked doors leading to tunnels from the 1920s. One local even said he traveled through a tunnel for 20 minutes. Rumors suggest some tunnels connect to the Hillsborough River and Ybor City. Research is ongoing, but no new info has emerged yet.
The ancient Indian texts mention beautifully decorated chariots or entire palaces called vimanas that could take off and, in a matter of seconds, fly away as far as space. Some people believe these vimanas only existed in Indian mythology, but it's also possible that they were based on a real technology that had been lost over the centuries. According to the Vedas, ancient Indian religious texts, there was the elephant vimana with several engines and many other types named after animals and birds. There was one for local travel, one for visiting different countries, and one for traveling to the moon and various planets. They could develop a great speed. One vimana had the superpower of invisibility. Another one was shaped like a sphere and was built on the winds produced by Mercury. This vimana was said to generate an enormous ray like the sun and make noise like the storm's thunder. All the vimanas were unbreakable and perfect for attacks on foes. Now, to operate a vimana, you'd need to know a lot of stuff, pretty much like today's airplane pilots. 32 secrets in total. They'd cover the aircraft structure and the secrets of taking off and maneuvering without crashing. That's a good thing. The pilot was also expected to know how to be seen and unseen, how to be hidden, how to be quick, how to manage contractions and expansion, and many other tricks. To hide the flying machine from foes, the pilot was instructed to move to the 8th atmospheric layer above the Earth and use the power of dark solar rays. This instruction might sound a bit weird, but there were others, more realistic ones, which still make sense in modern aeronautics. There are sections of ancient texts on the vimanas that focus on details like flight paths, pilot training, navigation, and even suitable clothes for pilots and recommended food for long flights. There was also a lot of technical detail about the use of heat-absorbing metals, the metals utilized, and melting points. The supporters of the theory that the vimanas were more than just myths are sure that the ancient Indians would unlikely go into all these details just for a beautiful story. So, the flying palaces might have been real and way ahead of their time, like many other great Indian inventions. Back in the 6th century BCE, an Indian physician named Sushruta basically wrote the original guide to medicine and surgery. They even called him the father of surgery for his work. Sushruta laid down the details on hundreds of medicinal plants and described complex surgical procedures. He gave instructions on nose reconstructions and skin transplants from one part of the body to another. The original method of rhinoplasty, which involved taking a piece of skin from the forehead to reconstruct the nose, is still used today. But back then, it had a slightly different purpose than surprising your followers on social media. Those nose jobs helped out folks who had lost their noses as punishment for crimes or in fights. Now, you gotta thank an ancient Indian math prodigy for the invention of zero. It might not seem like a big deal, but without it, we would have no binary system and no computers. People before the 5th century CE were only thinking about some sort of a sign to indicate nothing. The invention made addition, subtraction, and other mathematical operations a whole lot easier. You can see the oldest zero in existence carved in the wall of a temple in Gwalior, India. The Indus Valley Civilization was using rulers in 1500 BCE and earlier. Made from ivory, these rulers were found during excavations in what is present-day Pakistan and northwestern India. They were widely used in architecture with amazing accuracy. They had units corresponding to slightly over 1 inch that were marked with precise subdivisions within 5/1000ths of an inch. The next invention is more of a concept than a physical item. Standardization is all about setting the rules based on a bunch of people, things, or interests. One of its cool applications that we've all gotten used to is standard weights. Whether you're using pounds or kilograms, you need these universal measurements for weight, right? For this, we owe a big shout-out to the merchants from the Indus Valley Civilization who lived around 4,000 years ago. They were measuring everything from food grains to fancy luxury goods using these standardized weights. And their weights had decimal and binary mathematical systems going on. They didn't have high-tech gear, but they pulled off some serious precision using complex calculations and even sand for construction. Their art of standardization made its way to Persia and Central Asia, basically becoming the global weight-watching standard. So, if yoga is your go-to exercise, you definitely have a personal reason to appreciate the ancient Indian geniuses. Over 5,000 years ago, during the rule of the Indus-Sarasvati civilization in northern India, yoga was first mentioned in the Vedas. Yoga was refined and shaped over the centuries until it grew into a massive teaching with over 200 sacred writings dedicated to this way of obtaining enlightenment. At the beginning of the current era, yoga got a new trajectory thanks to a Hindu writer who laid down a system of yoga in his text, the Yoga Sutras. It became a whole-body rejuvenation, a life-extending practice with poses that you are still doing on the mat today. Yoga has reached the Western world only in the 19th century, and it caught on like wildfire. Chess, the all-time top game for intellectuals, is also an Indian invention. Its ancestor was called Chaturanga, and it was a strategic board game that started gaining popularity around 3,000 years before the current era. This early Indian version of chess was played by 4 people, not 2, and had 64 squares. Each player had 8 pieces, ranging from pawns to kings, bishops to knights, and there was no standard 6-faced dice. They rolled with an oblong one. Players facing off were actually allies, forming 2 teams based on the direction they sat. Chess, that we know and love today, was first mentioned in ancient Indian literature in a legend. It said that the wife of a villain called Ravana had invented the game to amuse him. Now, the word shampoo comes from the Hindi word, which means to soothe or knead. The substance was invented in India in 1762 and was originally used for head massages, hence the name. The first shampoo was made of natural oils and herbs. British traders fell in love with the idea and brought it back with them to England. It took years for the original head massage oil to evolve into shampoo as we know it today, but it's still an Indian invention. Unlike the ancient Greeks, who wore animal skins, the Indians started cultivating cotton back in the 5th and 4th centuries before the current era. They used cotton threads to produce fabrics that soon became a huge hit in the Mediterranean and beyond. Jute and wool also have their origins in India. Cashmere, the finest and most exclusive type of wool, actually comes from the Kashmir region of India. Buttons that sit proudly on that cashmere cardigan of yours also have ancient Indian origins. Some 5,000 years ago, the Indus Valley Civilization started cutting seashells into geometric shapes with tiny holes in them. First, they were just decorations, but then people started using them to fasten clothes. Now, when you think about radio communication pioneers, Marconi's name usually steals the spotlight. He got a Nobel Prize in Physics in 1909 for his groundbreaking radio work. But there's an unsung hero in the radio waves game and his name is Sir Jagdish Chandra Bose. He spilled the beans on radio communication way back in 1895. He shot an electromagnetic wave across 75 feet at the town hall in Calcutta, and it went through walls, rang a bell, and even set off some gunpowder. Marconi took a page from Bose's book, using his invention, the Mercury Coherer, as a blueprint for his own two-way radio. Bose didn't patent his genius creation, so he only got his credit a century later.
We've all been afraid of the dark at some point in our lives, haven't we? I mean, do you remember getting tucked into bed by your mom or dad after they read you some scary fairy tale with monsters and dragons or even dinosaurs? But just as your parents were about to turn the lights off and silently step out of your room, you remembered. What if there was something hiding under your bed? Or worse, what if some spooky creature was stuck somewhere in the closet? You could probably get up and check, but it was too dark out there. Wouldn't it be great to have some source of light that would come from within your body? You could always use it whenever you get surrounded by darkness. Unfortunately, as humans, we aren't able to do that. But there are a bunch of creatures out there that can, in fact, light themselves up. That's thanks to a little something scientists call bioluminescence. Animals and fish living in the ocean tend to have this talent more often than others. And you can find these creatures anywhere, close to the surface or deep down at the bottom. 2.5 miles deep if you have a knack for numbers. These creatures use their light for a lot of things, like communicating with other members of their species, luring in prey, and even scaring away enemies. Bioluminescence is basically an organism's ability to emit its own light. Chemistry has a lot to do with it. Such animals use two chemicals, one called luciferin and the other called luciferase. Add a bit of oxygen and bam! Light! Should you ever wonder if you actually observe bioluminescence or if someone just dropped a glow stick in the ocean, be on the lookout for neon blue, green, or even red sparkles in the sea. They're usually spread over a large area. This can even make the water look like glitter or a starry sky. You can thank squid, tiny crustaceans, and algae for this romantic atmosphere. Now, I've got another unusual phenomenon for you. How about a golden waterfall? I'm not kidding, it actually exists, and it's a natural phenomenon. To see it, you have to drive to Yosemite National Park to the Horsetail Fall. Make sure to plan your trip in winter or early spring. That's the only time during the year when you can see this awesome phenomenon. It doesn't need any scientific explanation. It's nothing more than sunlight at dusk hitting the waterfall in such a unique way that it makes it look like a river of lava. Or gold, your choice. That's the reason why during this time of year, the Horsetail Fall is also named the Fire Fall. Unfortunately, this phenomenon is becoming less and less visible within the years, mostly because of drought and other issues connecting with the melting of snow. So, should you ever decide to visit, keep an eye on the waterfall since the effect is very brief. Ever heard of a dirty thunderstorm? It's also called volcanic lightning. Apparently, specialists looking into the phenomenon have yet to fully grasp what it is. When a regular thunderstorm happens, particles with positive and negative charges collide, hence the giant spark we call lightning. It also makes a lot of noise, which you can recognize as thunder. But when a volcano is erupting, some of the volcanic ash particles get electrically charged, and while getting projected into the air with a huge force, they collide and cause electrical discharges. This whole process makes it look like there's lightning coming from the volcano itself. Imagine all that ash, gas, and smoke coming from the crater, and then add some electricity to the mix. It'll make the whole picture look really bizarre. No wonder this phenomenon is called the dirty thunderstorm. Now, how about clouds that look like waves? Those are called asperitas clouds, and they're actually quite close to the ground, unlike your regular day-to-day clouds. The name comes from the word aspero, which in Latin translates to rough or uneven. On rare occasion, you may spot such clouds when the weather is calm, but they're mostly associated with thunderstorms. These clouds appear during unstable atmospheric conditions, and surprisingly, they don't produce rain. Even though they do resemble dark storm-like clouds, they also create random patterns, tricking your eyes into thinking you're looking at the surface of the sea from under the water. Another impressive kind of cloud is called mammatus clouds. What makes them so special is a series of bulges emerging from the base of each cloud. One such cloud enters a level in the atmosphere where the wind direction changes. You can see these wave-like patterns in the sky. Australia is the place for you if you like surfing, but not all the waves you can catch there are made of water. Near a town called Hayden, there's a mysterious wave made out of rocks. This granite formation supposedly dates back to 2.63 billion years ago. That's way before dinosaurs started hanging around the planet. Standing at 49 feet high and 360 feet long, the wave was formed as a result of two processes: weathering and erosion. There's softer sediment at the base of the wave rock, which was chemically weathered by groundwater. Winds and rain did the rest of the job, causing the erosion of the rest of the formation. Its red, yellow, and gray stripes are made of iron hydroxide, carbonates, and other chemical compounds that were washed down by the rain. You've made it to Australia, so stick around a bit more. There's one more location here that seems unreal. You'll need to fly over this one, however, if you want the best picture. In the western part of the country, surrounded by green woodlands, there's a series of lakes. They're all a staggering shade of bright pink. Out of them all, the most famous is Lake Hillier, a 2,000-foot-long reservoir. It's surrounded by both sand and a forest of eucalyptus trees. This makes the cartoon-like hue of the lake stand out even more. One of the many theories explaining the color of these mysterious lakes is connected with algae. These algae appear to gather high levels of a substance called beta-carotene, which has a red-orange pigment in it. Another explanation involves haloarchaea. Those are microorganisms that sometimes look red. Even if you don't enjoy flying, the lakes are great for taking a swim. They're not toxic, even though they have loads of salt in them. This means you'll be able to stay afloat easily, and the water won't damage your swimsuit. During winter up north in Canada, a bizarre phenomenon happens at Lake Abraham in Alberta. Underneath the frozen surface, you can spot some weird objects that look like frozen jellyfish. It's definitely not the case, as these creepy formations are just frozen methane bubbles. Those are pockets of gas that were trapped underwater and got stuck there after the lake had frozen. They appear when leaves and grass fall into the water and bacteria digest them. This process transforms them into methane. This phenomenon is as beautiful and strange as it is dangerous. The pockets of methane can easily become highly flammable. When the temperatures rise during the spring, the ice melts and these bubbles start popping and fizzing. It's a spectacular sight to observe. Picture a lake filled with soda. Remember not to bring any source of fire. It can be very dangerous for visitors. You can check out these types of lakes all across Canada's Banff National Park. Nature often tends to make its own music. Just listen to the sound of crickets at night, or the soothing noise of a waterfall. But in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, there's a strange geological phenomenon which takes nature soundtracks to a completely different level. These are called the ringing rocks, and scientists still can't explain their unusual behavior. If you strike these rocks with a heavy object, like a hammer or another rock, the stones will make a ringing sound, as if they were hollow, but they're not. What makes the ringing rocks even more bizarre, apart from the mysterious sound they make, is that no animal wants to hang around there. Even though the rocks are surrounded by a thick forest, scientists haven't managed to trace any animal activity in the area yet. Even more striking is the fact that despite all the trees around the rocks, you won't find any leaves lying on the boulders. What makes these rocks so unappealing for both animals and vegetation is still up for debate.